Acting as a contrarian to a majority of investors is one of the best ways to outperform, but going against your own emotions is so hard to do. Here's how to be greedy when others are fearful. Today we're going to be looking at the Bitcoin Fear and Greed Index. And immediately, as you can see, this is just overlaying over Bitcoin's price action, these colored dots representing the current investor sentiment throughout Bitcoin. What we can see on this 0 to 100 scale, it's representing the current emotion that majority of investors are feeling, all the way from extreme fear up to extreme greed at a value of 100. As I film this, there is a value of 73 indicating a slow level of greed in the market. And what we can see is there is a huge and obvious correlation to Bitcoin's price action. Once we see huge exponential increases to the upside, investors are greedy, they want more profits, they want more capital. And of course, when price is on a very deep decline, once we've had an extreme amount of drawdown, when all hope seems lost, this is when people are extremely fearful of the market. They don't think Bitcoin is ever going to regain and claim new all-time highs. They think maybe that Bitcoin is over and it's died another death. But this isn't the case. What we can see is in every single one of these circumstances, the major sentiment, the overruling emotion and feeling throughout investors is wrong almost all of the time. Of course, there's periods when they're greedy and price continues to increase. And of course, there's periods when people are fearful and price continues to decrease. But ultimately, this is one of the best tools you can use to very quickly gauge from a multitude of sources the current sentiment, so you can maybe check your own bias and emotion to maybe act a bit more as a contrarian. If we just scroll down here, we can see that the components of the Fear and Greed Index are from a multitude of sources: the volatility, the volume, social media sentiment, dominance compared to other cryptocurrencies, and Google Trends. So we'll go through them one by one so you can see kind of every single component on its own individually and independently to see how they all collate together to provide confluence to form this Fear and Greed Index, one of the most powerful tools for Bitcoin investors. So as we can see the Bitcoin volatility here, we usually see incredibly volatile Bitcoin moves, especially if we just remove some of the longer term volatility metrics here. We usually see these huge volatile moves as Bitcoin's actually moving to the downside. When Bitcoin moves to the upside, usually it's more of a slow grind upwards, whereas when Bitcoin has these extreme dips to the downside, it's usually indicating that we've had a volatile decline, especially if we just isolate potentially a slightly longer volatility metric like the 2-week or the monthly. We can see there's almost this inverse correlation between Bitcoin's price and this volatility metric. We can see once we have these huge increases in volatility, price is decreasing. And of course, this isn't always the case, but this is just one of the components of the Fear and Greed Index. If we go to Bitcoin's open interest, this very strongly relates and correlates to Bitcoin's underlying volume. This is the current open interest or current open value of Bitcoin derivatives contracts. So perpetual futures or set expiry futures contracts that traders are using to try and utilize their leverage, try and increase their exposure. And we can see again, there's a bit of an inverse correlation with Bitcoin's price action and this open interest. Usually once there's a period of low volatility, we see open interest building as people try and place their bets. And usually we get a bit of a flush out once we have another volatile move in the Bitcoin price action, especially looking alongside the NVT signal, which is looking at on-chain Bitcoin volume. Again, very strongly correlated to a lot of the metrics we'll see today. Once we see volume dying off, once we see people not wanting to buy Bitcoin, once we see people not interested, maybe selling their coins, usually, especially once we look to almost a deviation from the average, once we see almost a mean reversion, too extreme of conditions of one side to the other, this usually indicates not a bad place to either accumulate if lots of interest has died off, or maybe a good time to maybe start selling some coins, especially if we have these huge runs to the upside above these upper red deviation bands. And another component is, of course, social media sentiment. We can see here that obviously on social media, you're going to get the extreme ends of greed and fear. Once Bitcoin is at an all-time high, you'll see everyone claiming how easy it is to make money in cryptocurrencies. You'll see everyone saying how rich they are, how much money they made, how much Bitcoin they own, how many Lamborghinis they're going to buy. And I'm, of course, not immune to this, but ultimately, what you'll see at the downside, at the bottom of Bitcoin's price cycle, people claiming new lows are inbound, Bitcoin's died, other cryptocurrencies may take over. Really, nothing influences sentiment and emotion more than price action, and social media analysis like this is another key component of the fear and greed index. Just as, like we said, Bitcoin's dominance compared to other currencies. So here we have the Bitcoin versus Ethereum ratio, and once we see Bitcoin really outperforming most altcoins, other cryptocurrencies, maybe there's not too much greed in the market. This is actually a very healthy thing to see Bitcoin's dominance increasing. But if we just zoom out a little bit here, we can see there are periods where Ethereum outperforms Bitcoin. And these are usually times when the market's getting very overheated. Once we see capital rotating from Bitcoin into smaller and smaller market cap altcoins, as represented by this market cap dominance percentage, this is another very key indication that people are getting far too greedy with their capital. They're trying to squeeze out every percentage possible of profit. And this usually aligns maybe with a Bitcoin price action peak. But the same is true for the downside. Once we see a flood to stable coins potentially, once we see absolutely no interest, once we see altcoins down 95+%, usually that is an indication of capitulation, that everyone is as fearful as possible. And another way we can really look at this is the Google Trends, their search term interest for Bitcoin. We can see once we have these huge spikes to the upside, it's usually indicative of new interest, new retail buyers coming into the space, potentially learning or purchasing Bitcoin for the first time. And again, unfortunately, these usually come in at market cycle peaks. And once this is at the bottom, once again, there's no headlines, no one discussing Bitcoin. These are the most opportune moments. This is how to be greedy when others are fearful, just as how we should be fearful when others are greedy. This is another key component of the fear and greed index. And once we actually collate all of these together, this is how we get this 0 to 100 scale of Bitcoin's current sentiment. And especially when utilized alongside some other metrics for confluence. So such as when we get these really extreme fearful conditions, scores far beneath 10 potentially. If these are aligning with Bitcoin hitting a key support level in the 200 weekly moving average, this is a great area for a high risk to reward accumulation zone for Bitcoin. And again, once we see these very high extended periods where prices increase very rapidly away from the 200 weekly moving average, and again, we see huge levels of greed in the market, people wanting to maximize their profit. This is another really good area to potentially try and lock in some profit, or at least tighten up your stop loss and really ensure you're managing your risk appropriately. And even intra-cycle doesn't have to be exact peaks or bottoms. We can look to something like the golden ratio multiplier, where we can see these constantly evolving and moving levels of support and resistance for Bitcoin, where a lot of key investors are going to come in to potentially take more medium, short-term swing trades on price action. Once we see Bitcoin bounce off of this 350-day moving average, again, it aligned very nicely with an extreme level of fear in the market. This could be a shorter term trade, or maybe just another area to accumulate on a bit of a pullback for Bitcoin. And once again, once we bounced above that, we hit this 1.6 accumulation high line. Not a bad area to potentially lock in some profits once more. So all of these together, this fear and greed multitude of sources, along with other look into Bitcoin metrics as confluence, really is an unbelievable way to maximize your performance. Also, if you haven't already, please don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications to ensure you're receiving all of our content as soon as it's released. And make sure to check out all the resources we've discussed today, as well as the many more that are all available on lookintobitcoin.com, your number one source for Bitcoin information. So just to summarize, the Bitcoin Fear and Greed Index collates underlying sentiment data from a multitude of sources to indicate the current level of market bullishness or bearishness of BTC investors. And historically performing as one of the most reliable tools for outlining price peaks and bottoms, we can visually see the benefits of acting as a contrarian to the market and your own emotions and biases. Like we said, it's very easy to get carried away. As much as we can say now at the next all-time high that we're not going to get carried away, we're not going to have bullish laser eyes, and we're not going to get overly taken away by the profit potentials. At these points, it's very useful to have a tool we can look to that is taking all of these data sources into account and can maybe help you to keep your own emotions and biases in check. And if you use this metric alongside other charts for confluence and confidence to create your own strategy for Bitcoin accumulation and distribution, you'll outperform a vast majority of market participants. If you liked this video, then please visit lookintobitcoin.com, where you can also consider becoming a site subscriber to get access to professional resolution charts, advanced macro and portfolio data tools, in-depth crypto industry reports, live and personalized indicator alerts, private TradingView scripts, and more, all for a fraction of the standard industry price. And let me know what your thoughts are down in the comments below and on social media. how you use the Fear and Greed Index as a component of your strategy, and what other tools you use alongside it for Confluence to really try and nail your accumulation and distribution of BTC. I look forward to reading and replying to all of them. Thank you all very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.